following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
Welcome to the GRTiQ podcast. This is part one of our two-part look back on the guests and ideas that shaped the podcast in 2021. During this episode, you'll hear excerpts from episodes 1 through 25. We'll be back with new episodes next week. In the meantime, enjoy listening to part one of the very best of 2021.
Episode 1.
From episode 1, Jim Cousins, member of the Graph Council and indexer with Wave 5, talking about his future vision for the graph.
Well, I think Graph is a really great example of a work token architecture, right? Where we're using the GRT token for many different, it takes on many different roles and allows us to provide, a service, a decentralized service to the community that needs it. I think the potential once the Graph protocol itself has matured is endless, and it goes way beyond just providing data for dApps. It's looking way beyond that into replicating this model for other services, right? But when I think about where this is going and why I'm so, why I've got the mind virus when it comes to Graph, is because it's the first time I've seen a work token really actually do its job, right? Often when you see these work tokens come out, they end up just being a subject of speculation, financial speculation. This is the first one where I've seen a real product behind it. So the work that's being done here, I think it echoes out into other industries where you might currently have centralized services providing information, right? That's where the whole Google of blockchains thing comes from. Maybe somebody could provide a decentralized search service using the same software. Maybe somebody could take an existing software as a service industry, a really big one, and make it work under a work token. That's the type of thing I like to think about. Things that are they're so far out there that you can't quite shape them in your mind yet, but that's the direction things are going.
Episode 2.
From episode 2, Derek Silva, founder of ComCom, a community manager working at the Graph, on why he's so personally interested in the Graph.
Because having worked at a digital agency for several years myself, I know just how hard it can be to build the types of things that people want in a centralized way, the quote unquote old way or the traditional way, I'll say, versus the complications that come with trying to get data from the blockchain directly. We've seen some facetious, sarcastic remarks, but that make a really good point about how we'll see sarcastic posts about like how the graph isn't needed because, I can just run a query and in a few days I'll get the response. Like that's quick enough. That's exactly what it's been like. And you can see the firsthand accounts from the teams at Uniswap and MStable and Foundation and elsewhere, where they rely on some sort of indexing protocol. If it wasn't the Graph, they'd be going out and either building their own thing, which of course completely detracts from the core decentralized app that they're trying to build and the core protocol that they're trying to build, or they'd be relying on some sort of centralized solution, which of course can go down at any time. If Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure can have downtime, which they do, or OVH, one of the world's largest data center providers, can have a fire in one of their data centers that literally takes massive websites offline, which literally just happened. It just goes to show how important decentralized solutions are to these problems and something faster and quicker. Like nobody wants, uniswap.info doesn't really work without that data being indexed, right? All those transactions and all those token queries and everything else. You can do it, but it is much, much harder. It takes much longer, and it completely detracts from Uniswap's ability to just build a great AMM. So yeah, we kind of can't live without it at this point, whether it's the Graph or something else. It's absolutely necessary. And for that reason and a lot of others, I'm sure centralized app developers are relying on it. it, and will continue to rely on it, as far as I can tell, for the foreseeable future. So it's a key part of some of the dApps I use every other day right now. And if that were to go away, that would really suck, to be honest.
Episode 3.
From episode 3, Tegan Klein, co-founder and business lead at Edge and Node, on her long-term vision for the graph.
So I think the graph is really kind of tackling the data market, the ad market, SaaS, as a business model, many different spaces within the ecosystem. And as I mentioned, I believe blockchains are the future of the internet. And I think the graph is how we'll get to that future. And we're seeing kind of an exodus from Web 2 into Web 3. The internet, the centralized internet, which is what I call Web 2, it wasn't created to monetize ads or sell people data, but that is very much what it's incentivized to do. And so that's what it's become. And so you have really brilliant minds within, all of these centralized tech companies that are really focused on selling ads or monetizing data. And now that we have decentralized infrastructure and kind of tokens as a business model, you don't really need to partake in those weird behaviors, and the payments can flow peer to peer within the ecosystem. And so now this infrastructure is being created, is coming to fruition. All of those brilliant minds are kind of coming and building within, or many of those brilliant minds are coming and building within this space. At Edge and Node, we have many examples of this. We just hired someone from Google who was managing a 100-person engineering team. Another person from AWS just joined us to focus on DevRel. The exodus has begun, but I think it'll kind of continue to ramp up more and more as we build more stable infrastructure in Web3. And so, I envision that in the future, everything will be queried and indexed via the graph, no matter the blockchain, no matter the layer 2. Yeah. And then I think the graph will potentially become a household name, just like the web is a household name, lowercasing the and lowercasing the G in graph. And then it just becomes kind of the graph, which is a public good for open public data.
Episode 4.
From episode 4, Juan Manuel Rodriguez de Fago, an indexer, delegator, and subgraph developer at the graph, on why the graph is so important.
Well, I've been working with the graph and subgraphs for at least over a year, actually. And I've had a chance to really experience why are subgraphs important and why people actually want to have a subgraph implemented for their protocol. It makes life much easier for developers, for everyone that's trying to develop an application that has to use blockchain data. Having a subgraph available it makes your life easier. And it's not like it makes it a little bit easier. It makes it a lot easier. It's just you have all the data that you need available, and you can really speed up the process of developing your own application without having to lose time implementing a proprietary solution to index or actually process the blockchain information. So I really think the graph has a lot of potential. Actually, it's already settled. The graph is being used by a lot of people, but the network itself could scale up even further. Right now, we have only a single indexer running, if you will, in production, which is the hosted service, because everyone else still hasn't had the chance to index a lot of subgraphs and serve them. So when the network is ready to scale up, which apparently will be quite soon, this could really scale up the reach that the graph protocol has right now. So that's a really big thing.
Episode 5.
From episode 5, Stefan Mueller, creator of the Graph Academy, on when he first heard about the graph.
The very first time I heard about the graph was, I think, back in summer 2020. And this goes back to my close-knitted circle of like-minded individuals that I managed to get in touch with back in 2018 as I was navigating the crypto space, and also throughout 2019 and 2020. And interestingly enough, as chance would have it, there was simply someone who recommended to me to have a look at the graph. I'm deeply indebted to this person because it wasn't something spectacular that I did hours of research and managed to find the graph, but it was simply a recommendation from a person out of this group. And yeah, that's what I did. I had a look at the graph, and I most certainly liked the project when I took a look at it. Even from my non-technical lens, what I saw, I did like. And if you fast forward a couple of months, I heard that the Graph was launching a curator program. I think this was in October 2020. And to be honest with you, I had absolutely no idea what a curator was. So this term in itself was something totally new. And I definitely knew that I wouldn't have what it takes to be an indexer in the Graph protocol. So indexers, people who operate nodes, I have no experience in that. So I was realistic. So I thought the role as a curator would be more suitable to me, if possible for me. So I read through the description they gave when they announced the curator program. And eventually, and luckily, I signed up to the program to participate in it. I'm really happy that I did it. And I think this was the beginning of my learning phase with the Graph, where I got to know the Graph and all of its intricacies, and where I took the time to learn more about the vision of the Graph and what the Graph represents. When I'm looking back, I'm really glad today that I took this time to learn about the Graph. And there were a couple of really helpful months starting on October 2020, and it helped me personally to build the foundation upon which I was able to build something much larger later on. For me, this was the seminal period of time where I had no pressure, we had no expectations, and I simply dedicated myself towards learning about the Graph and got to know more about it. And now in the curator program, we had these monthly video sessions. I think they called them kickoff calls or workshops. And I think there was at the end also a curator show and tell. And so I'm a naturally curious person, and I was profoundly happy that an entirely new world of opportunities opened itself during this kind of curator program to myself. And so we were just a group of, I think, wildly different individuals from very different backgrounds, and simply just excited about learning more about the Graph, what it has to offer, its opportunities. And I think we all were pretty happy about having joined the mission control program. I haven't heard of a single person who said, oh, it was boring or it was not exciting or anything like that. And most importantly, and this may have been the icing on the cake for me, to be honest, because the program convinced me as a non-technical person that I could actually participate in the community and that I could play an active role within this vibrant community. And for me, I think this was a major step, seeing that someone like me who may not be a developer and who may not be able to contribute code to this project could still play a role or have a meaningful role within this ecosystem. And so despite of being in crypto for around 3 to 4 years at that point in time, I've never actually had that happening to me. So there was never a project that fundamentally convinced me that I could add something to it without coding experience and without having a technological background. And I think this deep conviction that I could not only be part of the community, but also contribute my own share towards it and helping to accelerate this community is what finally helped me to meet the decision to become more active in the Graph. That's how I became aware of the Graph and how I started to become absolutely amazed by the Graph, but also how I realized that I could contribute to the Graph in a meaningful way.
Episode 6.
From episode 6, Jerry Okolo, a delegator and curator at the Graph, on how the Graph might change the world.
I think it's already changing the way information is stored and shared. And it's also changing the way we participate on the internet. If you look at the monthly query volume, it is a testament to that. I see the Graph as being a go-to source for truth. As more people around the world come to participate on the network, either by being a delegator, a curator, or an indexer, we'll see the Graph become even more dominant. One thing I really like that the Graph is doing is the way it involves other projects in discussion is very inclusive. So if you look at the subgraph community core, you find developers like developers from Zora, Rarible, and so on. And it's important for setting a standard that everyone is on board with. So I see the Graph as the go-to source for truth.
Episode 7.
From episode 7, Gary Morris, member of the Graph Council, and an indexer with 0x Fury and staking facilities are what initially attracted him to working on the graph.
I think something I and a lot of other people in this space look for is kind of, what is the token for? Is there a purpose for the token? Is there a use case for this product? Is there adoption? And even before mainnet, Graph has already been ticking all those boxes. You've seen the kind of adoption rates that they've been seeing, and it doesn't show any signs of slowing down. So the fact that they had this product that was already highly adopted, tied to their token, and now they're trying to decentralize that, it ticked all the boxes, and then even some in addition. And I think that that's something that's very eye-opening to a lot of people when they start to get more closely involved in the graph. They start to see the underlying value in addition to the surface level value.
Episode 8.
From Episode 8, Eva Balin, Director of the Graph Foundation, on the mission and vision for the graph.
Put very simply, it's index everything. If you want to think more eloquently, I would say making all data very widely accessible and creating decentralized markets. And then on the developer side, it would be enabling much simpler access to Web3 development. I think something that people don't realize about the graph is that it's not only solving this like very needed indexing solution, but it's also a new tool. Like the subgraph itself really obfuscates a lot of the challenges that developers experience. And so when we start adding new features like subgraph composition and mutations, we can actually enable Web 2 developers to become quote unquote Web 3 developers because they'll be able to interact with the blockchain directly from a subgraph. So the future for us is being that critical layer to enable data access and making dApps possible, and then also bringing in a larger group of developers. You know, I've heard stats like 50% of developers are JavaScript developers, which means we could easily make them TypeScript developers and start building these open APIs so anyone can use them.
Hey, this is Stefan from the Graph Academy, announcing the Graph Academy Grants Program, a program that is intended to foster the growth of our community-driven platform, the Graph Academy. We are offering grants to contributors to incentivize the creation of high-quality educational material. If you want to apply, simply visit thegraph.academy/grants. That is thegraph.academy/grants. You can also find more information in the show notes.
Episode 9.
From Episode 9, Zach Burns, software engineer at Edge and Node, on his process for choosing indexers.
I can tell you how I approach delegation personally, but I think it's important that each delegator come at the problem from a diverse set of angles. So first, I have a minimum bar for delegation. Any indexer that I delegate to must have both submitted a proof of indexing and collected at least one GRT from query fees. It's not much, but there's an enormous amount of work going from 0 to 1 to set up the infrastructure, learn the protocol, stake on chain, fully index a subgraph, and finally, serve that first query. It's a whole lot less work to go from 1 to 100 GRT than it is to go from 0 to 1. So that's my minimum bar. But from there, what I've tried to do is to pick a different reason for selecting each indexer that I've delegated to. For one indexer, it was performing well in the testnet. For another, it was that they built a useful tool. When subgraphs started migrating over to mainnet, I paid attention to see who responded to that in the first 24 hours. I've looked at the indexer profiles in the graph portal and picked one that had a profile that resonated with me and my beliefs. Once I looked at who was collecting the most query fees because I know how the indexer selection algorithm works. I know what it means to be selected, and that's a difficult thing to do, is to sort of rise to the top, to be good across the many metrics that indexer selection bases its decision on. So I know that they must be doing multiple things right if they had the most query fees. The answer seems kind of all over the place, but I try to look for something outstanding in every indexer that I delegate to, knowing that each one of them is going to be bringing their own unique value to the network.
Episode 10.
From episode 10, Konstantin Zaitsev with P2P Validator, an indexer at the Graph, on what drew P2P to the protocol.
We was kind of early investors in the Graph because team is pretty strong, and actually main idea of the Graph, it's pretty cool and pretty helpful for the blockchain. The Graph network, it is actually only one project about infrastructure itself. You can hear about a lot about Chainlink or maybe even Tezos or any other. But the Graph, it's not something like pretty common or something that a lot of people speaking about, because it is just a really working project with working utility tokens. A couple of days ago, one of the, I think it was a delegator, he asked in the Discord about the Graph and why it is so quiet about the Graph inside of cryptocurrency communities, and why I didn't hear about it a lot, because I don't know. It is a really important project because a lot of decentralized application already based on the Graph, and it's a really cool product which allow to work with blockchains and speed up all transactions and get all information to your dApp pretty quick. And it's obviously is a groundbreaking project that could be one of the base projects in the Web3.
Episode 11.
From episode 11, Dave Capist, formerly a blockchain engineer at EdgeNode, an early participant in the protocol, on his long-term vision for the Graph.
The long-term vision for the Graph that I see is really, a successful Web3 where we're getting a ton of data put through, blockchains and decentralized networks. And, Web3 really coming up alongside Web2 in power and influence and then surpassing it. I think Web3 definitely has that potential. So in that world, the Graph is just powering and indexing so much data. Like what we're doing right now is not even close to like the potential that could be done on blockchains and like what could be indexed. So really what I see as success for the Graph network is this protocol that is indexing all of Web3 and serving up queries, making it easy to read into all these blockchains. And it really becomes, multi-blockchain. The Graph network is reading into all blockchain data that's like really relevant, not just Ethereum, mainnet, all the other ones that are going to come up in the next couple of years, and connecting them in certain ways and allowing people to really read this data for a reasonable price. The thing is, like, the economics of the Graph will, that takes time to figure out, but that's the goal, is to index all this stuff and make data like fair for everybody around the world to access and use. And you can imagine if every single person around the world has the same access to data as everybody else, it really democratizes data in a way. And right now, that's just not the case. Data is siloed in a lot of places, and people, even in wealthy countries, don't really own their data. And then there's all the people in poorer countries who don't even have these privileges. So the hope is that Web3 brings all of this opportunity to the whole world, and then the Graph can just help democratize that data and make it easily accessible to everybody.
Episode 12.
Episode 12, a panel discussion following the migration of the first subgraphs from the hosted service to the mainnet. Here's Martine and Slim Chance sharing their ideas on how individuals can learn more about the Graph protocol.
I would love to recommend the recording of the Graph Day keynote by Yaniv. It gives an excellent presentation of our vision and what the protocol does from a very zoomed out perspective.
I would add to join the community in any way that you think viable or possible. The first step is basically jumping in one of our community channels in probably Discord server or Telegram, but I definitely feel from the communities that everyone is very welcoming. It's not just somebody answering questions, it's everyone helping everyone. And that's the best place to learn even or get directions if you don't understand a specific concept, besides after reading all the links or content that were provided here by Jim or Slim.
Episode 13.
From episode 13, Pranav Maheshwari, a solutions engineer at EduNode, sharing his long-term vision for the graph.
That's a very important question. And what I think is, if whenever a person is talking about application, he's only talking about decentralized application. If that guy is not making a decentralized application, that's not something that, is worth using. And whenever that guy is talking about decentralized application, that decentralized application should be made via the decentralized or the Web3 infrastructure. And I believe the graph should be an essential part of that Web3 infrastructure. You cannot imagine DApp without the graph, right? I vision that whenever people talk about making a decentralized application, they always build a subgraph for that, right? I envision that if anybody is getting any kind of information in the future, that's only via Web3. And it is in a way that, the information that he's getting is something which is trusted. And that's something that's only possible via the graph. So that guy already knows that, he's using the graph, and it is something which is something that can be trusted. So what I have is a vision for Web3, and and the graph fits in very, very nicely in that. I believe that Web2 is something that will, definitely day by day turn off, and it will get over. And Web3 will be the new internet. People will only use Web3 because of privacy, decentralization, scalability, security, permissionlessness, hundreds of reasons. People will start understanding the ethos of Web3, the community of Web3, this whole, retail people, or what we call as the end users, will understand and start using. The people who use Web2, the current internet, the people will start using Web3. They'll start interacting with decentralized applications which are permissionless. And these decentralized applications can only be called decentralized application if they use Web3 stack, and that Web3 stack. And I believe the graph will be an essential part of that Web3 stack.
Episode 14.
From episode 14, Adam Sofer, a software engineer and designer at LivePeer, a decentralized video streaming network that uses the graph. Here, Adam talks about how important the graph is for Web3.
Oh yeah, like running your own indexer, in the absence of the service that the graph provides, is like, it would just take so much engineering resources and time. And yeah, it would be hard to pull off. And you would be on the hook for making sure that your indexer is constantly running. And because if it's not, then your application can go down. And so, yeah, like no one wants to run their own indexer. This definitely needs to be a public network. Like Web3 needs a query layer. Like there's no question about it. It's kind of like, imagine Web 2.0 with no Google or search engine, having to if everyone had to run their own indexer to search HTTP resources like web pages and images and stuff. We take Google for granted, but that's a service it provides. And so the absence of a query layer in Web3 is just like a non-starter. It's really critical infrastructure.
Episode 15.
From episode 15, Marc-Antoine Ross, CEO and co-founder at Streaming Fast, on moving from one-time competitor to core dev partner with the graph.
When we started the company and raised money, I think it became obvious to our investors and the team that there was an important problem to be solved. And we decided to focus, we invested quite a few $1 million building this team and creating IP and developing high performance software for that problem. And This is extremely valuable IP that we're bringing to the graph, and that will help, the Web3 space tremendously, I believe. The reality is that philosophically, we became quite convinced that it would be 10 times better if that IP lived in the hands of the community, and if that IP was served by thousands of people, the indexers, and that we were leveraging the intelligence of the whole network, the whole community, to bring this vision to fruition. And so by bringing this IP and our passion in terms of software engineering to the graph, the team is convinced that we will be able to contribute where we really shine, where we're really good at. And we're convinced, more importantly, we're convinced that there's a full community of professional people that will take care of the things that we like doing a little bit less, or that we're less good at. It became obvious that the team was getting less and less excited about receiving pager alerts on the weekends when one of our nodes went down and we needed to take care of a customer. But there's a full community of indexers that will do that, that wants to do that, that is good at doing that can rely on each other to be able to not worry too much if one node goes down, because there's thousands of other nodes able to serve at that time. And we think that this creates a much more sustainable ecosystem that works together to solve that pain point that we were working on. And so while we've been extremely successful at creating a specific piece of software for one specific need, high performance indexing, because we were really focused on that as a team and we invested millions of dollars doing so, we value the overall collaboration of the community to solve the bigger problems all together and contribute to the best of their capacity.
Episode 16.
From episode 16, Chris Wessels with GraphOps, an indexer at the Graph. Here, Chris talks about his long-term vision for the Graph.
I think that as blockchain begins to eat more and more of both our fundamental institutions, but also the kind of products and services that we just use every day, they increase the total addressable market of the graph. And our lives already revolve around digital services. And there's certainly no doubt in my mind that the vast majority of these services will in time transition to be blockchain-based protocols and networks, because that style of coordination just is hugely superior for maximizing the outcomes for its participants and users. So as more and more and more of these digital services we depend on become blockchainified, they essentially fall into that total addressable market for the graph. And I think we're really just in the beginning of what that looks like. And today, that's largely these applications exist on things like Ethereum and, not much else. But in time, I think we are going to see a diversification of where these applications run and where they store their data as well. And what's really interesting about the graph is that in that context, it functions almost as this layer of connective tissue that is able to aggregate data and, create a real-time free market for that data in one place, even though it will be hugely disparate in where it is located in terms of the blockchains or execution environments like layer 2s where these applications actually run. But then also, if you look at the kind of evolution of the data requirements that any given application has, I think we're definitely going to see an evolution of data storage beyond storing data on the blockchain. And, that data, depending on the importance and trade-offs associated with storing that data will move into other places like Filecoin or Arweave or other storage systems that are decentralized and, have kind of strong properties over our existing systems, but still occupy quite a wide spectrum of trade-offs that applications will make depending on the importance or value of that data. And that, in the same way that we talk about the fragmentation of capital and applications as they move into things like layer 2s, I think the same is true for data. And as blockchain subsumes more and more of the services that we depend on every day, where data is located is going to become really disparate. And the graph is incredibly well positioned to just glue everything together and offer an aggregated and unified interface for querying that data in a meaningful way in one place without needing to deal with, any of the complexities of where that data is located.
Episode 17.
From episode 17, Nader Dabit, developer relations engineer at Edge and Node, on his move from a senior position at Amazon's AWS to Edge and Node and Web3.
When I joined Edge and Node, I was at a point in my career where I was a senior level person at AWS, and I was actually on track to become principal. And it was, the type of job where you literally probably could just stay there for the rest of your career and kind of continue leveling up. I was also considering a couple of other opportunities. So I did consulting in the past. My last year of consulting, I made over $400,000 and I kind of blogged about it. And to me, that was ridiculous amount of money. And it still kind of is. I mean, it really is. But my experience in consulting showed me I would be very successful doing that. And I was continuing to kind of do better and better. So I was really considering now that I've had even more experience with cloud, going back into consulting, and I was kind of thinking I could probably break that $500,000 or more mark, probably going back and doing that. I was also interviewing with Coinbase. I was kind of getting to the final steps with a couple of companies like Coinbase and Goldman Sachs and Bridgewater, which were all financial companies. But I was interested in finance. I was interested in fintech, but I felt like going to Coinbase or going to Goldman Sachs, I was going to be leading these new global developer relations teams at a pretty senior level. Even then, it was kind of going to be almost a lateral move where I'm going from this old school company. I wouldn't say it's that old school, right? AWS, still a tech company, but it's kind of like a corporate behemoth to another corporate atmosphere. Just wasn't that exciting for me, to be quite honest. So I was kind of not that excited about doing that. And so I was really just looking for the next thing, what was I going to really be excited to do? And I'd been keeping my feelers out for a few months, like I mentioned, interviewing and things like that at different companies. And then I kind of stumbled upon the graph because I am kind of was a speculator in different cryptos over the years. And one of the ones I was looking into was the graph, and I'd bought some GRT and looking into the tech behind it. I'm a GraphQL developer. One of the technologies on my team that we helped, build and also continue to maintain and improve is called AppSync, which is a managed GraphQL service that a lot of companies are using in production. We serve, massive companies like Ticketmaster and Aldo and BMW and Disney and stuff like that. So we had kind of had years of experience building out really sophisticated GraphQL APIs. So I really understand, I think, the GraphQL space, and I really like the technology. So when I started looking into the graph and I saw that they were using GraphQL, that kind of sparked my interest enough to start diving in a little more. So like you mentioned, I think when we talked, you also were kind of looking into the graph at one point. But for me, I was watching the videos from Yaniv and some of the other founders, reading their interviews, diving into some of the white papers and blog posts that they had written. And then that kind of got me interested in the entire space as a whole. So the whole Web3 and the whole decentralized web and blockchain space. So I think over the course of a couple of weeks, I started diving into all the different parts and understanding how everything fits together and where the graph fits in. And I kind of had this really aha moment that I can't really explain, that I have had one since since I learned coding and I realized that the future was kind of code. I think I had a similar aha moment with the graph. And I was like, okay, I want to work in this space. This is what I want to do. And I went to their jobs page and I found that Edge and Node had an opportunity for developer relations. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to submit to this job, even though I've literally never written a single line of Solidity. I don't even understand at that point like what Ethereum was past like a very, very basic level. I was like, let me just apply for this because you never know. This seems like it would be a lot more fun than anything I've ever, really done in the past, maybe. So I did that and I got the opportunity to have an interview. And, during the interview process, I met a bunch of people from the team. They gave me resources to check out, to learn more about the coding side and like the developer perspective side, which would be kind of what I'm working on now. And one thing led to another, and I got the opportunity, and I turned down, I would say a lot higher paying, roles at companies that I feel like aren't that, but those companies I feel like aren't as fun to work with, but also don't have, in my opinion, as much of a future as what we're working on. I feel like what we're working on really is the future. And it's something that I come to work every day extremely, extremely energized and excited. And I'm already an energized person. So to me, this is just a dream like come true. I'm having fun. I'm doing really cool stuff. I'm hanging out with great people. I'm learning from really smart people. I'm really having a good time.
Episode 18.
Episode 18, a panel discussion following the launch of Subgraph Studio, the updated Graph Explorer, and curation at the Graph. Here, Naina talks about Subgraph Studio.
Yeah, basically both of those. We are hoping to make it easier for people to create deploy subgraphs. And then in terms of publishing, you can publish to Rinkeby, which will be visible on our testnet. And then from there, publish on mainnet as well. But we are hoping that people will create more subgraphs and in the future collaborate on them. That's something that we are really thinking about adding into the UI. And then there's this whole API key and billing that's really is necessary to use the subgraphs. So if that had to exist somewhere. And for that, we actually use database, which is what Studio uses as well. So Explorer is a decentralized app and Studio is a more centralized app. So the big value of Studio is, on one hand, to create and publish more subgraphs and to give people a way to do it easily. Because otherwise, you would need it to call the contracts in order to publish your subgraph. But another big thing is as well the creation of API keys and billing. We really wanted to make a clear separation between Explorer, that's completely decentralized, and between Studio, that still is somewhat centralized. And for that, we need to kind of create this split and take certain decisions. So the value of Studio is that you can create API keys and do the billing other than publishing subgraphs.
Episode 19.
From episode 19, Kuhn with Mind, Heart, Soul, an indexer at the Graph, talking about how he thinks about and defines the Graph.
I would say the Graph is the most epic technology in the DeFi space for many years to come. The more I dig into the Graph, the more excited I get and the more that I see how useful it's going to be. I mean, they have been working on the Graph for like 2 or 3 years already, the Edge and Node team. But in many ways, it's still early days. The potential for the Graph is yet to come. I mean, the hosted service should be a clear indication with 7,000 subgraphs or more. And I think 29 billion queries in May. So that gives some indications of where the Graph is going to go. The last 3 months, I've been running a standalone indexer that's basically running the info section for a DEX, for a liquidity provider. And it's in doing that I've come even better to understand the power of the Graph. I've been serving production traffic for more than 3 months now. And we have seen averages of over 800 queries per second, which translates to 69 million queries in a day. So that was a very interesting experience. Found a few bottlenecks, learned how to troubleshoot them. So that's going to benefit me in the long run because I already had that kind of volume and troubleshooting behind me. But basically, at that point when I started, it was not yet possible, definitely not on mainnet, but also not on hosted. At this point, hosted service does support the network. But for me, it was a very clear indication of the power and the strength of the Graph technology that is running in all these different capacities to have such a powerful to have this technology at my hands and to use it in a way that was not hosted and not mainnet, but standalone operation, just to serve 96 million queries in a day for a project that actually needed it, for a project that wanted it, and that's still growing on a daily basis. That's what excites me. That's why I think the graph has so much potential. Now, as for what the graph is, it's still difficult to explain, but basically it's a data provider in a sense to provide access to blockchain-based data in an easier, directer way. And the graph as a technology it's a service provider. It's kind of ubiquitous to what it is serving. It has the power to serve the data. It is expanding the amount of networks it's possible to index on, but also it's agnostic to the content itself. Yeah, so the graph is there to serve data that exists in a blockchain. And for the graph itself, it doesn't matter whether that's a 2 billion coin or it's a 20K coin by the speaks of it. It doesn't matter to the graph if there is just the one user accessing the data or there is all 7 billion humans are trying to access that data. It's basically, it's a neutral way of transferring data, because anything that's there in the blockchain, it can serve as long as it's indexed. So it doesn't differentiate in a sense. And one of the reasons that I'm getting at is that in crypto space in specific, there is a lot of barriers for projects to gain traction. For example, the exchanges, they have listing criteria and they might only want the 10 biggest ones or the 10 with the most volume or whatever. That thing isn't really there in the graph. Even if you're a small or a starting project, you could use the graph and basically pay for what you need or have your user base pay for what they consume. And that's one of the exciting things, especially in the world where things like censorship seems to be on the rise, and quite unfortunately, the graph itself is a neutral technology. It can serve whatever data that needs to be there.
Episode 20.
From episode 20, Reem Sharor, ecosystem manager at The Graph, on what she wishes more people understood about the Graph Foundation's grant program.
I wish they knew how easy it was to apply. Like, sometimes it does, I do scratch my head because I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn's a place where a lot of people are talking about either promotions or new jobs that they've just taken on, but it's also a majority of people looking for work. People that have ideas and don't really know where to start, people that are supporting other people that are looking for work. And I scratch my head at this all the time. And I'm like, here's a foundation or a resource that you can use and tap into with an idea that you have, with maybe contract work that you can take on and really make a living out of this. So I wish people just knew how easy it was to apply. And I think you don't really know what's out there. What's that saying? Never let the fear of striking you out keep you from playing the game. Do not let the fear of you potentially getting rejected or someone saying no, that should be a way to move you forward and for a way to elevate you. And I think the best way for anybody to move forward in their career is to just give it a shot.
The GRTiQ podcast is made possible by a generous grant from the Graph Foundation. The Graph Grants program provides support for protocol infrastructure, tooling, dApps, subgraphs, and community building efforts. Learn more at thegraph.foundation. That's thegraph.foundation.
Hi, this is GRTiQ. If you've been paying attention, then you know that 2021 was a breakout year for the Graph. And 2022 promises to be another important year, and GRTiQ podcast will be here for all of it. In fact, we have a few surprises we're going to make available to you in the new year, including updating our website with some great new features and content, broadening our focus to include more of what's happening in Web3, and releasing a monthly newsletter that will provide listeners with a unique news story. The story of how Web3 is coming to life as told through the cutting-edge data and analytics made available only through the Graph protocol. A lot's going to happen in the new year, and we'll be here to shine a light on those helping to make it happen, to tell their stories, and to share their insights. Thanks for listening to this podcast.
Episode 21.
From episode 21, Chris Ramus with Chainflow, an indexer at the Graph. Here, Chris talks about the importance of keeping stake decentralized.
One of the things that in my early days participating as a Cosmos validator and reviewing the economics and token economics, I noticed early that there seemed to be a mechanism by which the rich get richer. And I believe a lot of people have this criticism of proof of stake. And when I pointed out, it's not to criticize what we're doing here, it's more to bring attention and awareness to the fact that if other decisions aren't made, then this rich get richer problem can happen and will happen and continue to happen. So in the case of Cosmos, I pointed this out early. The responses were anywhere from, well, this is the way it has to be done technically, to people are good, and people won't exploit the system, so we don't have to worry about it. Then shortly after the mainnet launch, and stake quickly accumulated to a very small number of validators, all of a sudden people started saying things like, wow, how did that happen? And what happened is once real money started to flow, many operators just, gravitated toward trying to accumulate as much as possible. And I think particularly from these bigger validator companies and especially the exchanges more recently, if you've accepted a lot of investment from people, those investors expect a big return. So how can you go out and participate in the staking economy and not try and grab every token available if possible, right? How can you go to your investor and say, hey, we've already accumulated, X number of GRT. We think that's enough for now. We're going to try and help other indexers accumulate GRT in order to protect the network and keep stake decentralized. Now, there might be some investors that get on board with that, but my sense is, most of these bigger operators, one, are too afraid to have that conversation or don't care to have the conversation. So as a result, that's a justification for trying to attract as much stake as possible. And by doing that, to me, that's orthogonal to the values of trying to keep stake decentralized. And what I see happening in these early, I still think we're in early days. What I see happening is that a lot of warning signs are flashing that if we don't get ahead of this soon, in a way, we're going to hit a point of no return, because the nature of staking economics is that they compound rapidly. So capital begets capital, and capital compounds capital. And once this centralization starts, it's really hard to turn. So what I'm trying to do with this Keep Stake Decentralized message is at least bring awareness to what's happening here. Because I think the other thing that's happening is many in the space will talk the decentralized talk, yet not really walk the walk. And for various reasons, some people don't want to rock the boat. Some people are afraid of these bigger operators. Some people, don't want to rock the boat because they think that'll negatively impact token price, of which they're getting compensated in. Many people turn a blind eye to this. And I really feel like it's a dangerous time to turn a blind eye to this, because the decisions we make now will really shape the type of economy that we build in the future, or economic alternative that we build in the future. And the way things are going now, we could very easily end up with an economy that is also controlled by a small number of very wealthy stakeholders. And if all we're looking to do is rebuild the current economic system simply on different tools, then to me, what's the point of this?
Episode 22.
From episode 22, Sebastian Siemsen, co-founder and lead application developer at Avant-Garde Finance, the main developer behind Enzyme, and member of the Graph Council. Here, Sebastian talks about how important the graph is for DeFi.
I wouldn't even answer this just on behalf of DeFi, but application DeFi development, Web3 application development in general. The graph has just changed the game fundamentally. Any application built this year and also last year is using the graph. I don't know a single one who doesn't use the graph and is successful. And that's simply because the graph really makes accessing data on the blockchain easier. And I'm not talking about it just makes it more convenient. It makes it possible in the first place. We have witnessed this, right? I'm always hearing the argument that the graph actually makes it simpler and more performant and more reliable to read data from the blockchain. In some cases, it actually makes it possible in the first place. I remember in the first version of the Melon protocol, we actually built certain contracts in such a way that it was possible for us to query data out of those contracts. And now we have completely changed the way we are building our smart contracts such that we do not design our contracts for real-time querying purpose outside of what their requirements are to work with themselves, like to establish the functionality through like their transactions. We are actually designing them with the graph in mind. So we are building events into these smart contracts whenever there's a state change. Anything that we want to track has an event associated with it directly in the contract. And we do that to make it possible to index this data really efficiently through the graph. So yes, you could say that we have changed the way we are building our smart contracts because of the graph. And it has made us 10 times more productive. And it has made certain data structures accessible to us that previously wouldn't have, like we wouldn't have been able to get that data out of the blockchain at all, right? People who are more technically advanced and know how interactions with smart contracts work to query for data, there are just certain limitations, right? So you cannot really query lists very efficiently. You have to really build the smart contracts with these things in mind. And that comes at a cost. And we completely removed that code. We completely removed that dead weight of our smart contracts simply because the graph's now a thing.
Episode 23.
From episode 23, Joseph Al-Shami, product manager at Figment, on how Figment and the Core Dev partnership will impact the graph.
Yeah, so as I was saying, our job is we're going to be bringing the graph indexing into other blockchains. And I think this is a step forward and an important step for the graph. We are actually enabling the graph to access more and more blockchains and having more and more applications being built on top of it and has more utility for the Web3. So I think this is increasing the importance of the graph and the importance of the role of the graph in the Web3. I think the community should be happy about it to see it as a step forward.
Episode 24.
From episode 24, David, a subgraph developer with Synthetics and Quenta and a curator at the graph, describing how the graph fits into DeFi.
Yeah, so like I said, with the unstoppable backend, aka Ethereum, nobody can really change your Ethereum data. Like they'd have to have your private key, right? So as a user, you want to make sure that it's not just the backend that's secure. You want your front end to be secure too. And like I said, part of that is getting quality data in an efficient way. So, it's really hard to do that with centralized service providers. It's not reliable. Any person in the world can live in a country where they decide to censor the applications that you interact with. And so if they do that, then how are you going to make sure that you could use the protocol that you've been using, right? Like this is your money at work and you don't want people to take that away from you. So it's not the same as Ethereum where it's like an unstoppable source of data that you're submitting transactions to, but the read side is equally important as the write side. As I said before, it's very important for any application to have quality data that is uncensorable and unhackable. So the graph does a really good job of that, and it's a great solution to a problem, and it's a very difficult problem to solve. That's why the graph is really the only team that I've seen with a solution right now in the market that's usable.
Episode 25.
From episode 25, Oliver Zerhusen, ecosystem manager at The Graph, on how community members can get more involved in governance.
One thing to look out for, first of all, is our forum that we have. And that's where governance discussions take place. And as we are gaining momentum for certain proposals, then you will see what we call GIPs emerging, which stands for Graph Improvement Proposals. As we march along in our discussions, we will then reach a point where we are looking to have the community to vote on proposals. And that comes in the form of snapshot voting. And when we do these votes, we also then look at the background of each voter, whether they are an indexer, delegator, curator, or simply a holder. And the way we currently weigh the voting is that network participants, such as indexers and delegators, get higher weighting in the vote than just a regular GRT holder who's not participating in the network. Naturally, the reasons for that are twofold. One, we want to incentivize engagement in the network. And B, is also, I think, fairly accurate to say that those who are invested in the network also have a higher interest in protocol decisions and voting.
This has been a production of the GRTiQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review. GRTiQ Podcast.